Want to turn to someone who really knows Ohio politics from the inside. David Pepper serves as the co-chair of that state's Democratic Party. He's also written several books, including Saving Democracy, a user's manual for every American. David, your read on this race, on the fact that apparently at J.D. Vance's behest, Donald Trump came back into the state because it looked like a very, very tight race between, you would think, the guy he picked being able to romp to victory given the state of the Republican Party. What's your read on this?
Yeah, I mean, it was clear that Moreno was begging Trump to come late. The endorsement somehow didn't really break through like it did for Vance a couple of years ago. So late polls had Dolan up, and I think that was clearly Moreno needed that visit. It may be the thing that puts him over the top to get a lot of attention. But until that point, it didn't seem like the endorsement had really put Moreno into a winning position. But it may have. That may have saved his campaign. And it did the same thing for J.D. Vance 2 years ago. He was in third or fourth, and Trump came in and saved him as well.
Yeah, and obviously he relishes that role because then he feels that that person owes him. I'm curious about this dynamic we see time and time again, which is what plays in the crowd and what plays the base may not be what plays outside of it. So I'm curious, after an event in the state of Ohio for this race that got a lot of attention nationally, if that attention was reflected locally in terms of some of the things he said, in terms of some of the blowback, et cetera.
I mean, I think basically all three candidates, just to be clear, all three by the end were trying to sound somewhat Trumpy. Trump coming in, whatever was picked up, you knew that he was in Ohio, supported Moreno, sort of attacked the others. So if the whole battle was who really had Trump's support, I think it did make a difference. But let's go bigger picture for a second, because the most important point is what happens in this battle between the older establishment and the Trump wing. And the most important number I can share with everyone tonight is the establishment governor candidate 2 years ago won Ohio by 25 points. J.D. Vance won it by 6 points. That is a horrific underperformance. And it was a terrible Democratic year. So the Trumpy, Vance, and Moreno lane in the general is not a very good lane, even in Ohio. And so if you have a closer election than a 25-point blowout at the top, where there was no urban turnout in 22, let's say single digits or 10 points, like 8 points where Biden lost in 2020 here, that underperformance changes the outcome if it's continued. So this Trump, Moreno's speech that you quoted there, where he said, are we the party of J.D. Vance and Trump? Well, they are cheering for the wing of the party that did almost 20 points worse than the more moderate wing that was all in for Matt Dolan. So they may want to, it's sort of like the Herschel Walker, Mehmet Oz, J.D. Vance wing that dramatically overperforms the older establishment Republicans here.
Yeah, and of course, Sherrod Brown, the incumbent senator there, a three-term senator, very popular. I've looked at statewide polling. I mean, he really has carved out an incredible niche. He has been the same guy. I profiled him when he was running for Senate in 2005 into 2006. And I will say this. He's exactly the same. If you go back and read that profile, he is exactly the same 20 years ago as he is now, the same focus, the same issues he cares about. He speaks in the same way. He is consistent. And in many ways, it seems to me that American politics, both in the Democratic Party, in some ways the Republican Party, has sort of come towards his positions a lot.
Yeah. If you look at how you win Ohio, there are a lot of key areas. But again, whether it's Matt Dolan, Bernie Moreno, whoever wins, just to be clear, you do not win Ohio if you don't do well along Lake Erie. That is where Sherrod will have a great sort of contrast. Let's say Dolan wins, the establishment guy, family owns the Cleveland Guardians, all that. Sherrod can go back to the counties along Lake Erie and make a great contrast against an establishment candidate like he did against DeWine when he first won. And if Moreno wins, I think Sherrod has a really good opportunity in the suburbs. Basically, Mike DeWine won the suburbs in a big way a couple years ago. J.D. Vance did not very well in the suburbs versus Tim Ryan. So whether it's Dolan or Moreno, and I don't know what's going to happen tonight, I think Sherrod's, as you said, his longstanding brand allows him to really pivot and contrast against either one of them, maybe in different parts of the state, but in really important parts of the state to give you that victory.
That's interesting. So there are different sort of the contours of this race might look differently depending on who comes out tonight. But to your point earlier about the sort of underperformance, I remember sitting in this room in 2022 and watching DeWine cruise to victory and watching Vance post that 6-point win. And there have been, this sort of attempts to boost Moreno because they think he's a weaker candidate. They've been trying to sort of they've run $2 million, one of the Dem-aligned, I think, super PACs, advertising portraying Moreno as an unapologetic conservative, wink, wink. What do you think about that strategy in the context of this race?
Yeah, I think it's a little risky because in the end, Moreno is dangerous and he is going to be, J.D. Vance for a lot of Ohioans is an embarrassment. All he does is he's not really our senator. He's Trump's senator. The last thing we want is 2 Trump senators from Ohio when we used to have people like John Glenn and George Voinovich. At the same time, I do think it's pretty clear, again, if you heard what I said about these lanes, if Moreno is fully in this Trump J.D. Vance lane, that probably is Sherrod Brown's best matchup. I mean, Tim Ryan, first time running statewide, only lost by 6. Sherrod Brown, much bigger brand against Moreno, who I think is probably a weaker candidate than even J.D. Vance was. I think that is a very, good matchup. Again, this is Sherrod's hardest reelection, clearly. But a Moreno matchup, I think, is actually one that he can win. But like I said, if Dolan does win, we don't know what's going to happen. I think it's a different pivot, a different contrast. It maybe looks a little bit more like how Sherrod beat Mike DeWine back in 2006 when Mike DeWine was a little more establishment.
Yeah, and after that loss, Mike DeWine never heard from him again. Kidding, of course. He's the governor, Dave Pepper. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Resolute Square.